The snow drifted softly outside the Grand Anderson estate as I stood in the opulent foyer, cradling a homemade apple pie. The warm scent of cinnamon and baked apples filled the air, but my mother-in-law, Victoria Anderson, regarded my offering as if it were something offensive. Her manicured fingers tapped impatiently against the fabric of her designer gown. Really, Emma? Store-bought would have been preferable. She didn't even attempt to mask her disdain. Behind her, my husband, James, shifted uncomfortably, suddenly absorbed in the details of his expensive loafers. I had spent hours perfecting that pie, carefully following my grandmother's cherished recipe. But of course, nothing I did would ever meet Victoria Anderson's impossible standards. To her, anything homemade was synonymous with mediocrity. She circled me like a predator sensing weakness. And that dress... I thought we discussed the attire for our family's Christmas Eve dinner. I glanced down at my simple green dress, one I had scrimped and saved for over the course of a month. But budgeting was a foreign concept to Victoria, whose every whim was funded by her husband Thomas's vast banking fortune. "I think Emma looks lovely," my sister-in-law, Rachel, interjected softly. But the moment Victoria's icy gaze flickered to her, she fell silent. "Lovely isn't a standard here," Victoria snapped. "The Rockefellers are joining us tonight. The governor's family will be in attendance. We have an image to uphold." I caught my reflection in one of the many gilded mirrors adorning the walls. At 32, I still looked younger than Victoria's impeccably preserved 60, but apparently, youth meant little when you were wearing last season's department store fashion. Her sharp eyes landed next on the simple pearl necklace resting against my collarbone. "Where is your jewelry? Surely, James has bought you something more appropriate by now." I swallowed hard, my fingers brushing over the pearls, my mother's final gift before she passed. "Mom," James finally spoke, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, what?" Victoria cut in, turning toward him expectantly. "Are we going to continue pretending your wife belongs in our world? Really, James, when you told us you were marrying a kindergarten teacher, we assumed it was a phase. 5 years. 5 years of these barely veiled insults, of subtle digs wrapped in faux concern. 5 years of James promising to stand up to his mother, only to crumble the moment she challenged him. "Victoria," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the sting in my chest, "I understand you have expectations." "Expectations?" She laughed, the sound as sharp as shattering glass. "I expected my son to marry someone who understood the responsibilities of being an Anderson. Instead, she waved a dismissive hand at me, as if my very existence was an inconvenience. Instead, he brought home a woman who thinks a homemade pie is an appropriate contribution to a 5-star catered event. Someone who wears off the rack when every other guest will be draped in Chanel and Dior." The doorbell chimed, and through the frosted glass, I saw the silhouettes of the evening's first arrivals. James exhaled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom's right. Maybe it's best if you don't stay for dinner." The betrayal shouldn't have stung. It wasn't the first time he had chosen her over me. But something about this moment, on Christmas Eve, with the snow falling outside and my grandmother's pie still warm in my hands, shattered something inside me. Better for whom, James? "Emma, don't make a scene," Victoria hissed. "The Rockefellers are here. Just go home. We'll discuss this after the holidays." I looked at my husband, still avoiding my gaze, at Victoria, already slipping on her perfectly curated hostess smile, at the pie in my hands, made with love for people who had never shown me the same. "You know what? You're right." With quiet finality, I set the pie down on the gleaming marble table. I never truly belonged here. I never had. Victoria exhaled dramatically, as if finally relieved that I had come to my senses. "James, escort her out through the back. We wouldn't want the guests to—" "Oh, no." I cut in, my voice ringing to the grand foyer. "I'll be leaving to the front door, just like every other guest." Victoria's expression turned ashen. You wouldn't dare cause a scene. But I was already walking, my head held high. I reached the door and pulled it open, just as Harrison Rockefeller and his wife prepared to ring the bell once more. "Emma..." Harrison's face lit up with genuine warmth. Nothing serious, I hope, his wife added, concern flickering in her eyes. The children would be heartbroken if anything happened to their favorite teacher. Nothing I can't handle, I reassured her, casting a quick glance at Victoria, whose confusion only deepened. The satisfaction was almost sweet. Enjoy your evening. And please, tell Emily she was a wonderful angel in the play. I stepped into the crisp night air, leaving Victoria to stammer her way through an explanation to the governor's wife, who was now approaching with her young daughter, another one of my students. What none of them knew, was that my modest teaching salary wasn't my only source of income. The inheritance my mother left me had grown considerably under careful investments. The educational software company I built in my spare time had recently been valued in the 8-figure range. And the Anderson estate, the very mansion Victoria paraded as a symbol of her superiority, was about to be auctioned off thanks to Thomas Anderson's unfortunate financial decisions. Decisions I knew all about because I sat on the board of the very bank that held their mortgage, quietly, anonymously. As I drove home to the snow-laced streets, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Message after message from James. Mom didn't mean it. Come back. We can talk about this tomorrow. I ignored it. Instead, I made a call. John, I said to my financial advisor, remember that property we discussed? I think it's time to make my move. Because Victoria was right about one thing. I didn't belong in their world. I was about to own it. 2 months later, I sat in my lawyer's office, reviewing the final paperwork for the estate's auction. Thomas Anderson's carefully constructed financial empire had crumbled spectacularly, taking their pristine family image down with it. The auction is set for tomorrow, Michael, my lawyer, confirmed. You're certain about this? The price is significantly above market value. A slow smile curved my lips as I pictured Victoria's reaction. The humiliation of informing her social circle that their beloved mansion was no longer theirs. Oh, I'm certain, I said. Everything is arranged exactly as you requested. Michael assured me. The bid will go through a shell corporation, completely untraceable to you, and the terms of purchase are non-negotiable. My phone vibrated. Another message from James. Please, talk to me. Mom's a mess. Dad hasn't been sleeping. We can fix this. I added it to the ever-growing folder of unanswered texts. In the weeks following that disastrous Christmas Eve, James had cycled through anger, pleading, and now, sheer desperation. Victoria had even attempted to visit my classroom, only to be turned away by security. Being an Anderson, it seemed, didn't grant automatic access to one of the city's most exclusive private schools. You know, I mused aloud, glancing at Michael. Victoria once told me teaching was a quaint little pastime for women who couldn't do better. He raised an eyebrow. Funny, I continued. She never realized half of her social circle sends her children to my school. The auction itself? Completely, deliciously uneventful. I wasn't even present. While my proxy handled the auction, I was in my classroom, guiding a group of bright-eyed kindergartners through a lesson on butterflies. But word traveled fast. Victoria had arrived at the auction, confident that one of her well-placed social connections would intervene and save the Anderson estate. Instead, an unknown corporation had outbid everyone, offering full payment in cash. There was just one stipulation. The Andersons had exactly 1 month to vacate the property. A week later, James cornered me outside my classroom. He looked nothing like the polished man I had once married, his designer suit rumpled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Emma, please, he said, desperation leaking into his voice. Mom's barely holding it together. That house has been in our family for generations. I arched an eyebrow, pulling out a folder. Really? Because according to property records, your parents purchased it 50 years ago from the Williams family. Just another acquisition for Victoria to flaunt. His face paled. Even their so-called legacy was built on carefully spun lies. The new owners. He tried again, grasping for something, anything. They won't even consider renegotiating. Dad offered more than their bid. I cut him off. With what money, James? The funds lost in bad investments? Or the fortune your mother burned through trying to keep up appearances? He had no answer. Moving day arrived, crisp and clear. I was there in an official capacity. To oversee the final transfer, Victoria hovered around the movers, barking orders as they carefully packed away her prized antiques. Meanwhile, Thomas sat in his study, drowning his sorrows with whiskey before the clock had even struck noon. Be careful with that. Victoria snapped as a mover lifted her beloved settee. It's worth more than your annual salary. Actually, I interjected, glancing at my clipboard. According to the auction records, most of your furniture was rented. That settee? It belongs to Hampton Lux Rentals. They'll be collecting it this afternoon. Victoria spun on me, fury flashing her eyes. What are you doing here? I smiled, perfectly pleasant, representing the new owners. We need to complete the final walkthrough before you hand over the keys. Her expression twisted in disbelief. You have no right. She has every right. A voice cut in. Rachel stepped forward, looking exhausted but resolute. Emma owns the house now, doesn't she? Silence fell over the room. Even the movers hesitated, caught in the moment. Victoria's voice came out in a whisper. What? Rachel let out a humorless laugh. Come on, Mother. The anonymous buyer? The 1-month deadline? The detailed knowledge of which furniture is actually yours? Who else could it be? I didn't confirm or deny. I simply continued checking items off my list. Impossible, Victoria muttered, shaking her head. She's just a kindergarten teacher. She doesn't have... Actually, Rachel interrupted, crossing her arms, I did some digging after Christmas. Emma's educational software company. It's worth millions. That school you mocked? Half the city's elites send their children there. Victoria's face went ghostly pale. And that homemade pie you turn your nose up at, Rachel continued. The one she made from her grandmother's recipe? That was Evelyn Montgomery's recipe. Victoria swayed slightly, her breath catching. Montgomery, a name that carried weight, old money, the kind that didn't need to put on a show. Rachel turned to me. Your father, she said slowly, as if piecing it all together. He was Samuel Montgomery's son, wasn't he? The tech pioneer. I finally looked up from my clipboard, locking eyes with Victoria. The same Samuel Montgomery who founded the bank that held your mortgage. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Family ties had come full circle in the most unexpected way. Victoria collapsed onto the bare staircase, her designer dress crumpling around her. All this time, you were so busy looking down on me, I said, my voice calm, that you never actually saw me at all. Victoria sat frozen, her expression unreadable. Oh, and that exclusive charity board you were desperate to join? I continued. I've been a member for 3 years. They're the ones who recommended my school to the Rockefellers. James appeared in the doorway, his face pale. You bought our house? Not quite. I smiled. I bought my house. You were just the previous occupants. Now it's time for you to move on. Victoria finally found her voice, outrage dripping from every word. You did this for revenge. All because of Christmas. I let out a soft laugh. No, Victoria. I did this because it was a smart business decision. That it happens to give you a taste of what I endured for 5 years? Well, let's just call that a side effect. Or, as you might say, a little hobby of mine. I strolled through the now empty mansion, the illusion of wealth stripped away with the rented furniture. My heels echoed against the marble floors that now legally belonged to me. I turned back at the doorway. No need to send a forwarding address. Any necessary paperwork will be handled through your lawyers. Paperwork. The voice came from Thomas, speaking for the first time. He emerged from his study, his expression weary. Yes, I replied smoothly. For one, the divorce papers. James staggered, as if the words had physically struck him. Divorce? Did you honestly believe I'd stay after Christmas? After 5 years of watching you prioritize their approval over our marriage, I tilted my head, considering him for a moment. Think of it as my parting gift, a lesson in valuing people beyond their social status. Victoria made one last attempt. The governor's wife, the Rockefellers, they'll never accept you after this. I arched an eyebrow. You mean the same Rockefellers who invited me to Emily's birthday party last week? The same governor who personally thanked me at his education fundraiser. Silence. I smiled, holding out my hand. The keys, please. Hours later, the house stood empty. Victoria had retreated to her sister's guest house. Thomas had downsized to a modest condo. And James? He disappeared to wherever failed husbands go. I stood in the grand foyer, the very place they had tried to belittle me. My phone buzzed, a message from Rachel. For what it's worth, you were always too good for this family. I exhaled, a slow smile spreading across my lips. I thought of Victoria's stunned face when she realized who truly held the power, of James finally grasping what he had lost, of Thomas learning the hard truth, that real wealth isn't always flashy. As for the mansion, it wouldn't remain a shrine to their legacy. The paperwork was already in motion. Soon, it would become the Elizabeth Montgomery Children's Center, named after my mother, a place where children, regardless of their family's income, would receive the best possible care. And the foyer, the very one where Victoria had turned up her nose at my homemade pie, would be transformed into a welcoming space, a place where no one would ever be made to feel unworthy. Because the best revenge isn't just buying someone's house. It's turning their monument to exclusion into a sanctuary of inclusion. As for me, I still teach kindergarten, still drive my reliable car, still bake pies using my grandmother's recipe. But now, when the society pages whisper about the Andersons' downfall, they also tell the story of the quiet teacher who taught them the most valuable lesson of all: never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book might own your mortgage.